All right, let's dive into a battle that, on the surface, barely seems like a battle at all. We're talking about a short artillery duel fought in the pouring rain with an incredibly small number of casualties. And yet, this one little engagement, the Battle of Valmy, is considered one of the most decisive moments in all of history.
To really get a grip on how big a deal this was, you just have to listen to someone who was actually there. The famous German poet Goethe, he was traveling with the invading army, and he knew right away that he'd just seen the world change. His quote just absolutely nails the stakes here.
So that's the big question we're tackling, right? It's this amazing paradox. A fight that was more of a standoff than a bloodbath, but one that managed to save a revolution and literally help shape the world we live in today. Okay, so to understand how, let's rewind a bit and set the stage.
We have to go back to 1792. The French Revolution is raging, and honestly, the old monarchies of Europe are completely terrified. They're looking at what's happening in France, and they don't see it as just some internal problem. They see it as a virus, a dangerous idea that could spread and topple their own thrones.
And that fear led directly to the War of the First Coalition. Think of it as an alliance of Europe's old guard, led by Prussia and Austria, with one single goal in mind: march on Paris, stamp out the revolutionaries, and put King Louis XVI back on his throne. So you see, this wasn't just about land, it was a war of ideas.
When you look at the two armies facing off, the difference is just staggering. On one side, you've got the Prussians. These guys were considered the best, the most disciplined, most feared army in Europe. Total professionals. And on the other side, the French, a chaotic jumble of soldiers from the old king's army mixed with brand new, super passionate, but completely untested volunteers. I mean, on paper, this was supposed to be a total mismatch.
And for a while, the invasion went exactly like everyone thought it would. The Prussian-led forces pushed deep into France, knocking over key fortresses like they were nothing. By September of 1792, suddenly, the road to Paris was wide open. It really looked like the French Revolution was about to be snuffed out.
And that brings us to September 20th, 1792, near this tiny little village called Valmy. The French commanders, a couple of guys named Dumouriez and Kellerman, they actually managed to maneuver their armies behind the Prussians, which forced the invaders to turn around and finally fight. And this is where the story takes a wild turn.
Now, there's a reason they call it the Cannonade of Valmy. This wasn't your typical battle with cavalry charges and clashing swords. Nope, this was an intense, hours-long shootout between cannons, all happening in a miserable, soaking rain. And here's the kicker: the French guns were just better.
And there's a really good reason for that. See, while the French infantry was a mess, their artillery corps was maybe the best in the world. Thanks to something called the Gribeauval system, their cannons were more modern, they were more accurate, and they could be moved around faster than what the Prussians had. This technical edge was absolutely critical that day. But technology was only half the story. At a really critical moment, when it looked like the Prussian infantry was finally going to advance, the French General Kellerman did something amazing. He put his hat on the end of his sword, raised it high, and shouted a totally new kind of battle cry: "Vive la nation! Long live the nation." Not long live the king, the nation.
And that was the spark. The entire French line roared the cry back. They started singing their new revolutionary songs like La Marseillaise. Imagine being a Prussian soldier expecting to fight a disorganized mob, and instead you see this unbelievable display of passion and unity, this revolutionary fire, what the French called élan. Their will to fight just started to evaporate.
So, faced with better cannons and troops with this shocking level of morale, the Prussian commander just called off the attack. And when all the smoke from the cannons finally cleared, the number of casualties was, well, it was just unbelievable.
For a battle that would literally change the course of history, only about 500 men were lost, combined. That's about 300 French and 200 Prussians. In an age of just horrific, bloody battles, that number is almost nothing. It's wild.
Which brings us right back to that bizarre paradox we started with, an incredibly small price to pay for what turned out to be the birth of a new world. So what gives? Why did the most feared army in Europe just pack up and go home?
Honestly, the Prussian retreat has been a puzzle for historians for a long, long time. Why would this legendary army turn tail after such a tiny little fight? Well, there's no single smoking gun. It was really a whole bunch of things, all hitting at once.
It was pretty much a perfect storm. For starters, the French had dug in on high ground, a really strong defensive spot. Then you have that incredible morale we just talked about, which nobody saw coming.
On top of that, the Prussian army was in bad shape. Weeks of marching in the rain meant they were sick with dysentery. Their commander was a cautious guy, and crucially, Prussia was getting nervous about what Russia was up to back in Poland. Valmy was just the final straw that made them say, you know what, this whole invasion isn't worth it.
Meanwhile, back in Paris, news of the victory, no matter how small, hit like a lightning bolt. It had this immediate, massive political shockwave that was about to change France forever.
I mean, just look at this timeline. The speed is stunning. The battle is won on September 20th. The very next day, feeling bold from the news, the government in Paris completely abolishes the monarchy. And the day after that, on the 22nd, the French Republic is officially born. You can draw a straight, undeniable line from the cannons at Valmy to the birth of the Republic.
Okay, so let's zoom out. What is the true legacy of this little candidate? Why do historians put this small skirmish up there with massive, world-changing battles like Waterloo or Stalingrad?
Well, it's really four big things. First, it was a gigantic psychological win that saved the revolution right when it was about to die. Second, it gave the world this powerful new idea, a citizen army, a whole nation of people fighting for a cause, not just for a king. Third, because it survived, the revolution had time to grow stronger and eventually spread its ideas of liberty and nationalism all over Europe. And finally, it was a preview of a new kind of warfare, where belief and morale were suddenly just as important as guns and tactics.
So here's the bottom line. Valmy didn't win the war for France. What it did was make sure the war could keep going. It gave the revolution critical breathing room to survive, to evolve, and to unleash everything that came next, from the Reign of Terror all the way to Napoleon Bonaparte, the forces that would define the next 25 years of history.
And listen, this wasn't just the French patting themselves on the back. Even the guys who lost, the Prussians, they understood what had just happened. They knew they hadn't just lost some minor engagement. They had witnessed a deep, fundamental change in how the world worked.
And that leaves us with one last huge question to think about. What if the Prussian army had broken through that day? If the revolution had been crushed back in 1792, how different would our world be? How different would our ideas of nations, of democracy, of what it means to be a citizen be today? It's a powerful reminder that sometimes the entire course of human history can turn on a single rainy afternoon.